Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. It's finally arrived. After 14 weeks of action and 12 games played by every team in college football, 11 if you include Army in that discussion, it is championship weekend. I'm very excited to get here and break all of these games down. Some of the most important games that we've seen in the history of these. History seems a little dramatic, right? We're talking about teams actually going away from conference championships at this point, but there are lots of ramifications that are going to happen as a result of these games. You look at the ACC in particular, that's a conference that they might lose out one of their teams. If one team wins, they may just end up having one team as it is. There's a lot of calamity that is in store for the ACC potentially if one thing happens, and we will talk about that one thing when we get into our ACC preview. It is our college football overtime preview show. Very excited to do that. And before we get into all of this, got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Garrett. Look, there are 9 games this weekend, 5 of which will immediately determine who's going to be in or out of the college football playoffs. Very excited to break it down. It is a huge championship weekend across college football.
Yeah, and look, there are a lot of games that are significant, more for seeding than it is for who's in and who's out. You look at the SEC, you look at the Big Ten championship. Those are 2 games where you pretty much both teams are in as it stands right now. But if you look at like the Mountain West Conference, you look at the Big 12 Conference, and potentially the ACC, you have conferences that are trying potentially to play for a play-in type of game. It's almost like a first-round matchup, if you want to put it that way. But one other quick thing before we jump into these previews too, we discussed at the beginning of this year, one of our talking points all the way back in August, which feels like years ago, by the way. We discussed which newcomers had the best chance to win their leagues, specifically in these power conferences. We have a chance that all of the Power 4 conferences could have a brand new team winning the conference championship. Arizona State's one, Oregon, Texas, SMU, 2 of those teams. One of those teams was a dark horse on this podcast, SMU. I don't think anybody saw Arizona State coming at the beginning of the season. That just shows how much changes from week 0 all the way to week 14. But all of them are also effectively lightly tested teams when it comes comparative to the rest of their conferences, except for Arizona State. Arizona State went through the ringer of the Big 12 Conference. But if you're looking at Oregon, you're looking at Texas, you look at SMU, they played a lot of the lower tier teams in their respective conferences. It's going to make for a very interesting weekend, but it's also because you see a lot of these tighter spreads than we have in years past. It's a lot of the conference expansion, and they've gone away from the divisions that used to exist in the sport, for better or for worse. We'll discuss all of that when we get into the offseason. But for right now, let's jump into some of these game previews. Just an interesting nugget I wanted to throw out there. Abe, did you want to say anything on that? Do you want to just jump right in?
No, I mean, look, I think we did kind of have Texas in that group. No one surprised. You and I did both like SMU. The biggest surprise to me might actually be Oregon, and the fact that somehow Ohio State's not in this discussion right now. But Oregon had an outstanding year last year. They had to replace a number of pieces that went to the NFL, including a starting quarterback. To do that so seamlessly in the first couple of years of head coach Dan Lanning, it's just really impressive. Really impressive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one of those things that Dan Lanning is quickly rising the ranks of some of the best coaches in college football. Several people had him in the top 5, if you want to talk about rankings for what it's worth. But let's jump into the SEC championship game. It is my favorite game of the year, just about every single year. It's a little bit different. It's got a new team in there, the Texas Longhorns, and one team that we've seen quite frequently over the last couple of years, specifically the Georgia Bulldogs. And this is the 8th time that we're going to see a rematch in the SEC title game. And for anybody who says, it should favor the team that lost the first time, not so fast, my friend. Those teams that won the first time are actually 5-2 in that rematch. The most recent one was back in 2017 when Georgia beat the Auburn Tigers, and after they got mollywopped the first time when they went to Jordan-Hare Stadium around the end of the season, Georgia got the last laugh and won the SEC championship and played in a national championship that year. But this is another instance of that. We'll see if that's the instance, if that's what happens in this game. That stat also goes back to 1999. But
the stat itself is biased because in most situations, the team that wins the first is probably just the better team in general. So like it's always going to lead that way anyways.
But that's the thought. But the team was good enough to go play in an SEC championship. It's just a pushback to what everyone says. It's like, oh, it's a disadvantage to play a team. That's not what the numbers say in this regard. It's also not the NFL. So that, and I've seen that conversation tactic several times throughout the build up to this game. But let's go back to the first game and see what happened in that game, and whether that's something that we can see happen for a second time, because I don't think that we're going to see the same game. I don't think that there's really any remote chance that we see that type of game, because Georgia played their whole game on the Texas side of the field. They had scoring drives of 13 yards, of 28 yards, of 34 yards, 30 yards, and then they had one big one right there at the end of the game to really put the game on ice. And that just came on the heels of 4 Texas turnovers and the fact that they jump out to this big lead and they start dominating the rushing attack for Texas. They held them to just 1.1 yards per carry. They were 3 of 19 on third down. They humiliated Texas. That offensive line allowed 7 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, and look, the 4 turnovers were just absolute backbreakers. And Texas was shell shocked in that game. I don't think Texas was ready to go for when the Dogs came to Austin. I think there'll be a slightly different Texas team, mostly because of what we've seen Texas do over the last couple of weeks at a higher level. And that thing in particular is run the football. And Wisner, what he's been able to do on the ground, he's got like 344 yards, 350 yards or something on the ground just in his last 2 weeks. That is a huge thing. Arch Manning, I think, is going to have a big impact on this game. He played some meaningful minutes in that first game, but that was also at the end of the first half when Texas was just looking for any kind of spark. It ended up backfiring on him. It was a weird game. It was a very weird game, but I just don't see that path happening one more time.
Well, I got 6 questions about this game, and I'm going to run through them pretty quickly. I think you've actually touched. Yeah, I think they're all fair, though. The first question is, what version of Georgia do we get? Are they going to bring it the way they brought it in Austin? I think we've seen Georgia have it on certain nights and not have it on other nights. If they don't have it, they can lose this game. If they have it, we saw what happens when to Texas offensively if Georgia has it. And so which version of Georgia are we going to get? Can Texas, as you mentioned with Weissner, can Texas continue to run the ball with efficiency? And then doubling down on that, can Georgia tackle in space? They have had good nights and bad nights tackling the ball carrier. Don't let Texas get the extra yards. I think that's important. Which quarterback makes fewer mistakes, Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers / Arch Manning, if we see him? Both of these guys, and I know we focus, you and me, Garrett, on Carson Beck playing much cleaner against Tennessee, much cleaner against Georgia Tech and UMass as well. Quinn Ewers has 1 interception in his last 4 games. He's cleaned it up a little bit as well. For Georgia, can Nate Frazier, or if he returns, Trevor Etienne, keep that offense balanced by having success running the ball on their own? Can their wide receivers and tight ends make some plays and stop dropping all these passes? I think there's still a gear that this Georgia offense can hit that it hasn't hit because those guys are not as reliable as you need them to be. And then the final question, and I think this probably parlays back to the first game the most. Ultimately, is this just a game about coaching? And if so, what kind of edge does Kirby Smart give you over Steve Sarkisian? Georgia can probably have a relatively similar game plan to what they did a couple of months ago in Austin. Texas cannot. They have to make changes from what they did that night. Can they? And then how does Kirby adjust to what Sarkisian has in the game plan? I think that's going to be very interesting as well. The biggest thing for me is, does Georgia have it? I think when Georgia has their A game, they are the best team in the country. When they don't, they go to 8 overtimes against Georgia Tech. They lose on the road to Ole Miss. They get pushed around for a half by multiple teams over the course of this season. If Georgia has it from the offset, they're going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, and there's just little things about that. I mean, it's just it's can the Georgia front 7 step up and play a good game like they did the first time around? I mean, I think that's something they can recreate. It's something that we haven't seen them do over the last 2 weeks. I mean, they were giving up chunk plays to Georgia Tech and to UMass over the last 2 weeks. I think they played one of their best games of the season against Tennessee. I think that was probably their best game. But that's also a game where Tennessee had control of the game for the first, for very large portions of that first half. Dylan Sampson is better than any running back that Texas has on their roster right now. So that's very important to note. I also don't think that Wisner's at the level of what Georgia Tech can do at running the football. But that's also a team that it's like, if you let Wisner go and beat you like they did against Texas A&M, then it's going to get it has potential to be an ugly game for Georgia, because I need to see the Georgia offense step up on its side of the field. I need to see it consistently through 4 quarters, because that's something that's plagued this team constantly this season. In the first time these guys played, and again, I don't see us recreating this type of environment, like whatever happened in that game. I don't see that game recreating itself. But it's worth noting that Georgia did score 23 points in that first half. That flew directly in the face of what they had been doing and what they have since done in the first halves. I mean, you look at what they did against Georgia Tech. That was dreadful. They got shut out in the first half, and they're averaging only 13.5 points per game in the first half. It flipped the game on its head the first time that these two teams played. When you score that level in the first half and then your defense plays the way it does, your offense putting points on the board and finishing out drives changes games. And that was the biggest key for them, outside of just 4 turnovers, which you get 4 turnovers in a game, you probably should win that game. It doesn't matter who you're playing or where you're playing or what you're playing. You should win that football game if you get 4 turnovers. But look, can they do that again? Can that front 7 get up and rally up and play really hard? I think they can do that if they're playing their best ball, to your point, Abe. But if they're not playing their best ball, they're going to lose this game, because Texas is very, very talented and very, very good and very, very physical. So that's not a game that you're just going to be able to lean against your opponent and get a positive result.
The other thing is the wild card that's gotten a lot of attention this week, and that is the backup quarterback for the Texas Longhorns, Arch Manning. How much could we see him? What sort of package maybe does Texas have him involved in? Is he in the red zone to try and increase the ability of the quarterback to run the ball in? I don't look at it like you saw Haynes King do. I don't think they want Arch Manning to have the ball or to run the ball in that manner. I don't think he's the sort of guy that Haynes King is. We've seen Arch Manning against Georgia, and he didn't exactly look ready for the moment at that time. He might be a little bit readier for the moment now, potentially, but what does Steve Sarkisian try and do with him? I don't think it's going to have as big of an impact as a lot of others do, but that remains to be seen. But it's certainly an asterisk and something you're keeping your eye open for.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to say about this game before we move on. We got a lot of games to get into right here on the College Football Overtime podcast, so we got to roll through this here in a second. But look, I think this all comes down to how well Georgia is able to run the ball, because Carson Beck, I think, is playing good football. But if Carson Beck is forced to play a perfect game or do everything on his back and he has to shoulder the load, then this isn't going to go the way of the Dogs in this game. I just think that they need to be able to run the ball well enough to really take some pressure off of him. And that was something that Trevor Etienne did exceptionally well in that first game. It was probably their best rushing game of the season. Maybe not by output, but by performance, I think it was. And it was one of the big reasons why they were able to cap off drives with touchdowns. Etienne's health is unknown as of right now. We don't know if he's going to be a full go in this game. He's missed the last couple of weeks. He's been dealing with a rib injury, but look, he was also dealing with some injuries coming into that first game. He came out, he played his best game of the year. And I think that the Georgia team as a whole played their best game of the year outside of the quarterback position, who Carson Beck had the one heroic drive, but outside of that heroic drive, it was dreadful. So can we see Carson Beck play a clean game? I think that comes down to his wide receivers helping him out and actually catching the football. That's huge. And then outside of that, running the football, that's also going to take a little bit of help from him as well. Any more final thoughts on this game before we move on?
There are questions along the offensive line for Texas. A couple of injuries picked up over the last game or two, and we'll see if Georgia could take advantage there. The defensive front was absolutely dominant the first time, and if they can match that effort, because they haven't really looked quite that dominant since, if they can look that way again, Georgia should find a way to win this game. But I'll have to see them look that way before I'm all in on that one.
Yeah. All right, let's move into the West Coast. This one's going to be taking place on a Friday night. It's the Mountain West Championship, UNLV and Boise State. And this one, most people would be like, why are you talking about this game? What are we talking about? Well, if you notice two little things, if you're watching on Twitter or on YouTube or wherever, you see little numbers by their name. They're the number 20 team and the number 10 team. And that means in the 12-team era, they're playing their way into a college football playoff slot. Yes, as crazy as that sounds, not so crazy, because Boise State might have a Heisman Trophy winner on their team, and UNLV might actually be the best team in the Mountain West Conference when it's all said and done. This is going to be a very interesting game. So if you are up on a Friday night, you absolutely need to have this on your television. I'm very interested in this game because UNLV has actually looked better since the new guy took over a quarterback. This is a team that had a quarterback quit on them after the 4th game of the season and then actually saw their stock improve. And if it wasn't for that crazy game against Syracuse, they might be a top 15 or a top 10 team in America. That was a wild football game from earlier in the season. And this is a good football team. And Boise State, I think they're going to have a lot to say. I think they've been playing some of their best ball recently. Ashton Genty's been running rampant on everybody, just like he normally has. It felt like for a time he was getting a bit tired. And I think he's kind of hit the reset button, and he is playing some of his best football right now. Ashton Genty and UNLV, I mean, this is going to be a great game. I'm very excited for it. And the winner is going to be not only the Mountain West champion, but a representative in the college football playoff.
Yeah, at stake for Boise, obviously, is a first-round bye. They'll get one if they win. UNLV probably the 11 or 12 seed if they can find their way in. You mentioned Ashton Genty. He's been running all over everyone. One team he didn't run all over was UNLV. 128 yards in that game. His lowest yard per carry in 3.9 in their first matchup in October. And you speak about the legs of Ashton Genty. You want to beat UNLV, just stop the legs of Hajj Malik Williams. He has real trouble beating teams through the air. And so this is going to be, as we talk about for a number of different matchups, this is going to be about the run games for both sides. Quarterback run for UNLV, the rushing attack out of Ashton Genty for Boise State. Whoever can be closer to their normal season average in this game, I think can win. And then the kind of wild card is Maddox Madsen, the quarterback for Boise State. I think we have seen at times he can beat you through the air if he needs to. I have not seen that yet from UNLV and Hajj Malik Williams, at least not with any regularity. So Maddox Madsen, I think if UNLV puts it on his shoulders to win this game, we've seen him be able to do that at times this year. I think that's the big difference between these two teams.
Yeah, I'm interested in this game. I think this is absolutely one to watch. The winner of this one's going to be the Group of 5 representative in the college football playoff. But let's move into the Big 12 conference where Iowa State and Arizona State are going to be meeting. This is one where I don't think a lot of people really expected either of these two teams to be playing in this game. I don't think a lot of people expected them to be playing here just a month ago. But conversely, Arizona State's been playing some of their best ball as of late, and they have been a fun team to watch this season. Iowa State felt like they peaked a little bit early, but have since rolled right back up, and now they backdoor their way into the conference championship game. Arizona State, on the inverse, just sort of kicked the door in on the rest of the conference. They're playing some of their best football, but one very important thing to keep a note of, what is the health of Jordan Tyson? Because he is not going to be playing this game. And how much of an impact is that going to have on the rest of this offense? Because throughout the second half of the year, you have Sam Levitt and like what he's been able to do. You have Scatabo, what he's been able to do. But Tyson, it just feels like that third horseman, if you will. And they play their best ball when all three of those guys are clicking. He's not going to play in this game. So what does it look like after that? And then the other big question that I have here is, will this game be too big for either one of these two teams? Iowa State, Arizona State, these are two teams who not a lot of people expect a lot of on any given year. Iowa State's had a couple of good years, but neither of these teams have ever played in a Big 12 championship game. Obviously, Arizona State's their first year in the conference. But even when they were in the Pac-12, they weren't one of those types of teams to, play at a high level with any level of consistency, and I don't think that a lot of expectations resolved around them. So all these guys might in this game think, oh, well, now I have to up my level, my intensity level just up a little bit more and not think that what got them there is going to be good enough. Right. And that's where mistakes happen. And I wonder if that's something that becomes a theme in this football game. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but it's something that you've seen. You see it at these amateur levels, if you can really call college football an amateur level anymore. But you see it. And it's not an uncommon thing.
Yeah, I think you're overthinking that point a little bit too much. I think these guys are going to be fine from that perspective. Look, I thought this is a game Arizona State had an easy handle on. If it just going to be honest. When I saw the Tyson news that he's going to not be out just for this game, but for the remainder of the season, it does raise some questions about how far this team can go. The problem is Iowa State's it should be still a very positive matchup. This is one of the worst rushing defenses for Iowa State in the entire Big 12. And Arizona State has showed their willingness to hand the ball to Scatabo and hand the ball to Scatabo and hand the ball to Scatabo. Upwards of 30 carries, upwards of 170 yards last time out. And they're going to continue to do that. And the question is, can Rocco Becht, Jaden Higgins, and Jalen Noel, the two receivers that he's going to look for? But Arizona State's got this safety not a lot of guys know about, Xavier Alford. He's one of the best safeties in the country. He's only given up 7 catches and 76 yards in over 420 snaps this season. He's going to be locked onto one of those receivers. And so it's going to be important for Rocco Becht to spread the ball around the Iowa State quarterback. I still think this is a game that when you think about what can win in the Big 12 or in college football, if you can run the ball and play defense, I think you got a pretty good shot. Even with the Tyson injury, I think Arizona State can run the ball and play defense. I think the challenge is on Iowa State to find ways to score enough in this game. I think Arizona State will score. With Scatabo, they finish drives. I think that's one of the most important aspects of what he does is they pound and pound and pound in the red zone, and he finishes drives. Iowa State's got to find a way to keep pace with them. This is a really good game. I think Arizona State was going to run away with this one if Tyson plays. I think he's been so dynamic a piece of offense for them that it really brings Arizona State back to the pack, back to Iowa State in this game. It really is a coin toss. I lean towards Scatabo in the running game. I just think it's reliable. I don't know what I can necessarily rely on for Arizona State, for Iowa State, pardon me. But if they can find a way to wrangle Scatabo, this game gets real interesting.
Yeah, it's just we haven't seen them do it with any level of consistency this season, and it's cost them several times. The game against Texas Tech, the game against Kansas. What's the theme? Well, those teams that they played are high volume rushing attacks. This is a high volume rushing attack, and maybe they've learned their lesson. They've played some better football. They've won 3 games in a row to get here to this point. But it's not like they looked super compelling in the process. They do beat Kansas State. That's probably their best game of the season, their best win of the season. But it's not something that we've seen consistently enough for them for me to feel comfortable in picking them in this game. I'm leaning Arizona State for the same reason that you are. Iowa State's not very effective at stopping the run, and that's something that Arizona State perfectly fine with doing. They just want to run the ball. And the only other thing, besides this game just potentially being too big for any one of these players, it's the fact that Arizona State hasn't been super effective in the red zone. They've been really, really good between the 20s. But when you actually get into scoring in the red zone, that's where they have seemed to taper off just a little bit. And when you look at this in just a vacuum, like if you're looking at just specifically what this game is going to be, then this is not that could be a big factor in this one. That could be the difference at 15, 20 points. You know, like if you're kicking field goals instead of scoring touchdowns, that's huge. So you have to finish off your drives in the red zone if you're Arizona State. But I think all the matchups do lean towards Arizona State. Iowa State hasn't been as tested throughout the course of the season as Arizona State, and I think Arizona State is just going to be ready for this moment. Let's move into the Atlantic Coastal Conference. Probably the team that has the most reason to be upset after the most recent college football playoff rankings. Syracuse beats Miami, and Miami gets knocked out. Miami not only gets knocked out of the ACC championship game, they get knocked out of the whole damn thing. They're out of the college football playoff. They plummet outside of the rankings. Alabama skips them in the ranking despite having one more loss on the season. And that also pushes up an old familiar friend, the Clemson Tigers, a program that has dominated the ACC over the last decade or so. In fact, to the point where they've played in 8 ACC championship games in that period, and they've won all 8 of them. I don't know if that matters. I don't know if it matters at all. You know, it probably doesn't. But I do know that Dabo Swinney loves to be doubted. And I know that Dabo Swinney has a chance to get his doubted Tigers into the college football playoff, but they have to win this game. This is there's two very similar teams, just in the way, the trajectory of their season. You know, an SMU squad who was not playing great ball at first, and then they ramped way up, right? You have their one loss of the season that came against BYU way back in September. Feels like forever ago, but Clemson They've had a little bit more of a roller coaster. That's the only difference. They've had some very big games. They've also had some really bad games. The bad games, of course, they came against their best competition this season. The 34-3 loss to Georgia, the 33-21 loss to Louisville, the 17-14 loss to South Carolina just last week. The biggest theme in those games, their offense goes to sleep. And that cannot happen against this SMU squad.
Yeah, I mean, what a range of emotions for Clemson. I mean, you're sitting there pretty. If you could beat South Carolina, you're probably in as an at-large, and you don't have to even play the ACC title game. You lose to South Carolina, and now you know you're out. You're not getting an at-large bid. But wait, what happens? Miami blows 21-0 lead, and all of a sudden you are playing once again for your playoff lives. Clemson can make it in by winning this game, and then the question becomes, and that's something you and I can talk about after the fact if it matters. Is SMU hanging on for an at-large bid if they can't get the automatic? And that's its own discussion. For Clemson, the season has come and gone in the same manner. Cade Klubnik and Phil Maffa, in my opinion, have not been good enough to put this team over the top in areas that maybe we expected to see them in previous seasons. And I think it's more the same this week. SMU has one of the best rushing defenses in the entire country. They're number one in the ACC. They're number 4 nationally. And it's going to be tough for Maffa to get going. And the question, I think, is not just about stopping Maffa when you deal with Clemson. You got to stop Cade Klubnik. He single-handedly won some games this season with his legs. You got to deal with the quarterback run as well. But if I'm SMU and defensively, I look at this and say, I'm forcing Cade Klubnik to beat us with his arm because we stopped his legs and we stopped the run game with Phil Maffa. I feel pretty good about those circumstances, especially considering what this offense can do with Kevin Jennings, the quarterback who took over a couple of games into this season and has kind of ignited SMU onto the run that they're on now. This is a dangerous team. They are an overlooked team, and they have something to prove, an opportunity to do it, by the way, against a bigger name program in Clemson. This is a big game for SMU right now. I like the matchups. I really do. I think they're number 8 for a reason. I think they're a one-loss team for a reason. You could sit here and tell me that the quality of opponent is not great, and I can't really argue with that. Their one loss is BYU, who went on to be 8-0 or 9-0 or whatever it was before they picked up their first loss. That was by 3 points. They've been competitive in every game. They've been right there. Rhett Lashley, I think, in the discussion with Curt Cignetti for National Coach of the Year. Those would be my 2 candidates. So I think SMU is going to be ready. The question now, though, when you brought it up, that championship experience from the program, and maybe not necessarily as many guys on Clemson right now, but just the feel of it, man. It feels like they should be ready for this game. It's obviously not too far from their backyard in Charlotte, so there might be some advantages in terms of crowd. But yeah. SMU's got money, man. I don't know how they're going to travel. That's the other aspect. And so this one's fascinating. This one's really fascinating. Obviously, Alabama's going to be watching this with some extra gusto. They're going to be pulling for SMU. If Clemson wins, Alabama could be knocked out. If SMU wins, Alabama's going to get in. So they're going to be pulling for SMU. I'm going to lean on that run defense. I'm going to lean on the Ponies offense. I do like SMU to win this one.
Yeah, that's what I think SMU's got a great shot of winning this one, mostly because Clemson has risen and fallen to the level of its opponent all season long. And until Clemson proves me wrong, I'm just going to continue siding with the better team. You know, it's not that they don't match up talent wise, because I think Clemson can match up talent wise with damn near anybody in America. But it's the fact that the level of play just doesn't come up to snuff whenever they play the best teams. And that's generally a pretty big red flag to me. So until proven otherwise, I'm going to side with SMU and the teams of that ilk when they go up against Clemson. But look, I will say this, though, about Clemson, and I'm not trying to bury them at all when I say any of that, but they've looked a lot better since that week 1 debacle against Georgia when they score only 3 points, especially the offense. And I think if their rushing attack with Phil Maffa can kind of give them some breathing room, then I think they've got a shot. That's their path to a win here. The SMU rush defense has been one of the best in America. You pointed this out to me when we were in studio earlier this week. They only allowed 95 yards per game on the ground. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Kevin Jennings and Rashard Smith in that offense, they hold the ball for a very long time and they score a lot of points. They've been scoring 40 points per game since he took over as the starting quarterback. So generally, when that kind of thing happens, you build up a lead and you throw off teams' game plans. They're not able to run the ball. But with Cade Klubnik and the rest of this offense, I think that Clemson's going to remain strong with that run. And I think Clemson, if as long as they can limit the big play to some degree, which they haven't been super good at doing this year, if they can limit the big play and keep this a tight ball game, I think that bends into the favor of Clemson. If SMU is able to break it open early in the game, I think it could be a rout. It could be over, right? Or at least the game would end. But if Clemson can keep it close, I think that they'll have a good opportunity to win this game. I don't see Clemson winning this game in a rout. I don't think that that's the path to a win here. It's Phil Maffa dominating on the ground and Cade Klubnik having a little bit less pressure on him when he's dropping back to throw. And maybe he can extend plays and use his legs, because that's going to be very important, because SMU has an elite pass rush. They're one of the top pass rushing units in the country. I think they're top 12 in sacks in FBS. So if they do get that lead and they have to go away from Phil Maffa, then they can pin their ears back and really get after this Clemson offense. And that's a recipe for disaster if you are the Clemson Tigers. Just make life hell for them. But this also feels a little bit like a legacy game for Clemson. They need this. I think Dabo Swinney needs this. I'm not a super big fan of calling things legacy type moments before they even happen or even immediately after they happen. But Clemson feels like it's been a program on the decline here for a little while. And this has the makings of a nail in the coffin type game. If SMU comes in and just pounds their face in on Saturday, then you're going to have some very uncomfortable conversations in Clemson. He's not on a hot seat by any stretch. I'm not trying to suggest that. I'm just trying to say, I just think the era of the Clemson Tigers would be officially closed.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I don't disagree with you. I think you talk about them hanging on. If they can get into the college football playoffs by winning a conference championship, they have hung on. But you're talking about National Signing Day was on Wednesday, and they're outside by some measures the top 25. Certainly outside of the top 20 is Clemson for a team that refuses, for the most part, to go into the portal. That's not how you continue to build a winning program. And so I agree with you. They have been slipping. And now you've got, by no doing of your own, by the way, an opportunity to reclaim a spot in the college football playoffs. Again, you gave up your spot in two ways, by not making it to the ACC title game yourself, but then also by giving up what would have been an at-large spot to South Carolina in that loss. And so you're right. This is a chance to say maybe we haven't fallen that far. We're still in the field. And so a lot on the line, certainly for Clemson, a lot on the line for SMU. I know a lot of people, there's a big debate about whether they would get in over Alabama. And so they should not feel safe going in. You got Texas and Georgia should feel safe. Oregon and Penn State, who we're going to talk about, they should feel safe. SMU should not feel safe. And so they have something to play for too.
Yeah, absolutely. SMU likely this is likely a play-in game. We don't know that for a fact with SMU. I'm just going to go off on a limb and say that SMU needs to win this game to feel completely safe. Because the committee sure loves itself some Alabama. So remove all doubt and go get a win here. But let's move into that Big Ten championship game. What do you say? Penn State and Oregon. And if you had, I don't know, if you missed the game on Saturday and then you woke up on Sunday and you had to see Penn State playing in this game, you're like, what the hell? What happened to Ohio State? All I know is Christmas came early for James Franklin and the Nittany Lions. An incredible gift when the Michigan Wolverines beat this Ohio State team. And look, they have a chance to go be a number one seed in the college football playoff when it's all said and done, which is an insane thought based off of what we've seen from this team at times. But here we are. And I think that this conversation has to start with James Franklin. I don't think that any conversation about what Penn State is or what Penn State could be should start anywhere but with its head coach. And it all comes back to the fact that this dude has been dreadful in these top 5 games. Whenever he faces a top 5 opponent, it seems like they come out on bottom. And most of the time, they don't look good in the process. They're 1-13 against teams ranked in the top 5. They've lost 11 games in a row against top 5 opponents. Since 2022, Penn State's 32-1 against teams not named Ohio State and Michigan, compared to 0-5 against those two teams in particular. Now, that 1-13 mark has a lot to do with the fact that those top 5 teams were Michigan and Ohio State. That's kind of their boogeyman, if you will. But it's not like they fared much better against the other top 5 teams that they have faced necessarily. The score line on average in this game, 32-17. That's a 14.9 points per game differential. And then this season, you just look at the ranked opponents that they faced this year. It's 2. They scored 21 points against Illinois, a team that's still in the top 25, a good defensive team. Are they that good? And then 13 against Ohio State. Granted, I mean, I guess that one wasn't home. Never mind. But I was going to say it was in the horseshoe. Like, no, wait, the last one was in the horseshoe. But no, this is kind of a team that rises and falls to the level of its competition. Can it rise to the occasion against Ohio State? Or excuse me, against Oregon? Because it historically has not done super well against the likes of Ohio State and against Michigan. But Oregon feels like they're built from that same, or cut from that same cloth. What do you think?
Well, a couple of things here. Certainly would not feel comfortable if I'm a Penn State fan if this game turns into a shootout. I don't want to go up and down the field with Oregon. I need to see my mainstay on defense make plays. And for those of you who haven't paid attention to Penn State enough this year, Penn State offensively and defensively are about 2 people. On defense, it's about Abdul Carter. He's going to be a high-end pick in the NFL draft. Defensive end, he's got 10 sacks on the season. And the biggest concern for me, and this is why I just don't know how long Penn State has, even when they get into the playoffs, what happens with a team that can defend Tyler Warren, the tight end that is setting all sorts of records there for Penn State. He is their leading receiver by 2 in terms of the reception total. He has twice as many receptions. He's got one guy, Nick Singleton's got 4 touchdowns out of the backfield, but he's got twice as many touchdowns as any other of the receivers. You focus on him and you stop him and you say, Drew Aller, Singleton, Allen, run game. If you can find a way to beat us, then beat us. But that guy, that tight end is not going to beat us. And I just have concerns about a team that can possibly defend that. And I think Oregon's got the athletes. I don't think they need to blitz to get pressure on Drew Aller. They got some of their own horses up front that can get the job done. And look, Dylan Gabriel's not really in the Heisman consideration, but he's not that far off. This is not a guy I would want to go up and down the field against. And so I think Penn State's got to find a way. And I'm not going to get crazy. I'm not going to say they need to win this 13-10, but you got to keep this game in the 20s. I think we're going to be realistic. You got to keep it in the 20s. If it gets to the 30s or 40s, you certainly have to favor Oregon in this one. Quite frankly, I'm very interested in this because it feels like we've only seen Oregon tested really once by the Buckeyes. You had to go all the way back to the Boise State game, but Oregon wasn't itself yet at that time. I'm very interested to see if this Oregon team that we've crowned as number 1, that is the last man standing as an undefeated conference team right now in the Big Ten, are they capable of winning a national championship? I need to see them handle business against Penn State. I'm very interested in this one. To me, Penn State just feels like you can handle their offense if you don't make mistakes of your own and allow their defense to put their offense in positions to succeed. I think it's going to be very tough. Drew Aller's been good. I just don't know if I buy him in a big game. The run game, Garrett, you and I have talked about this every single time that we're post Penn State game, and we're just like, I don't know, man. They just didn't run the ball the way we thought they were going to this year. We've said that like 5 times this season, especially in competitive games or in losses. The Ohio State game, that close win against Minnesota that required a fake punt. I mean, that stuff happens because they're not running the ball, and too much is being asked of Aller, and he only really settles on Warren. And so Penn State needs to be a lot more well-rounded on offense. They need to get that run game going because I believe that Oregon has the horses to limit Warren a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. And look, that was my biggest note from this game, or coming into this game, is the fact that I have been saying about how good this Penn State rushing attack is, right? I'm like, oh my God, Nick Singleton, Katrin Allen, those guys are going to be so important in this game. And then they're not. then they're just not. And I don't really know why, because it feels like they are the best and most important players on this Penn State offense, but it never feels like they're featured for some reason. And it seems like other opposing teams find success against them. I mean, the USC game is one in particular that I thought that they were going to just eat USC alive. It's not a particularly good rush defense. It's one that's much improved from last year, but objectively, it's not all that good. But Nick Singleton and Katrin Allen weren't a factor really in that game. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that USC jumps out to the big lead and everything changed, but they were able to come back and they win that game eventually on the arm of Drew Aller and mostly Tyler Warren. I think that was the game that he had like 19 receptions or something insane. Like, you're exactly right. This team, we talk about what that rushing attack is, but Nick Singleton and Katrin Allen really haven't had individually unbelievable games. They've had a few 100-yard games between them, but they haven't had that game yet where they are definitively the most important person on the team, right? Either one of them, right? They have big games, I guess you could say, like really strong football games, but nothing where they are just definitively the best player on the field. And I think that's what it's going to take for them to win this game. One of them, not both, just one of them. Nick Singleton or Katrin Allen, one of them needs to step up. And I need to see like a really strong triple-digit effort. I'm not asking for 200 yards of offense or anything like that. I'm just saying you need to be the guy who's a bell cow, who you can definitively turn around and put the ball in their gut, and they can get you the yards that you need. Because they did that at times this year. Never like really all that consistent with it over the course of the season. But if that offense is going to want to find success, I don't think it's going to be Drew Aller and Tyler Warren because that's been the recipe for most of the year. But I don't think it's going to be enough unless you're just going to go win a low-scoring affair, which, fine. If you're able to do that, power to you. But this Oregon passing attack just doesn't feel like that's going to be the path to a victory here. Evan Stewart, you got Tez Johnson. What those guys have been able to do this season with Dillon Gabriel at the quarterback position, they've been elite. That passing offense has been a lot of fun. Very high-flying attack. But Penn State's also playing some of its best defense of the year. The secondary is really, really good. They had two guys out of the transfer portal at the beginning of the season. It's paid off in a big way. They've had one of the best secondaries in the Big Ten Conference this year, and they're going to have to play a very good game. Because if they do, I do think that one thing that does favor Penn State is if this does get into a defensive slugfest. If Oregon can't slow down Abdul Carter or Dennis Sutton, the rest of that front seven, they're a top 8 run defense. And if Oregon's not able to run the ball, that's going to open up the door to them just powering down Dillon Gabriel. And you can get after him. And they have a really good pass rush, and I think that is the avenue for Penn State if they want to win this game. But I just have a hard time believing that Oregon isn't going to find some level of success, at least to a couple of explosive plays. But if Penn State can limit that, I think then they've got a good chance of maybe potentially getting an upset in this game. But they're only 3.5-point favorites here. It's not like this is some large gap that they have to make up. They have talent. They've got the tools to do it. With James Franklin, I haven't seen it happen with any level of consistency for me to believe it yet.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up too. You talked about Dan Lanning earlier as a rising tide, one of the top 5 head coaches in college football. And before there was the Lane Kiffin argument, there was the James Franklin argument, and we've never gotten the answer to that, right? And Ryan Day's having his own situation too. But the James Franklin question about big games and big moments and all that stuff, here's another opportunity for him because don't get it twisted. I think the winner of this game gets the 1 seed. I know that Texas could beat Georgia and theoretically be the 1 seed. I think if Penn State were to beat Oregon, they might get the 1 seed. So I think that's at stake for both teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big weekend. Lots of very compelling football games. So all the more reason for you to follow along the College Football Overtime podcast. We do this twice a week, and we'll do it again here on Sunday. All of our reactions to what turns into a very important weekend of college football. Lots of ramifications that will have long-lasting effects, and there are going to be some very angry people. We're also going to have our rankings reveal that's going to be coming out on Sunday after the fact. So all the more reason to like and follow the podcast, the College Football Overtime Podcast, GChatBTL, at Abe Gordon on Twitter. Give us a follow there, and we talk a lot of college football. So Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us. We are College Football Overtime. We will see you again on Sunday. Thanks so much.